All right, let's just jump right in. Today we're decoding the 10 recitations Vinaya. And I know, ancient monastic legal codes can sound incredibly dense, but we're going to see how they actually offer this fascinating window into human nature, asceticism, and the very real, everyday friction of monastic life. You'll notice our backdrop today features these absolutely exquisite portraits of Buddhas and the solemn, serene beauty of the Pure Land of ultimate bliss. We're doing that on purpose, because it provides this profound, almost shocking contrast to the gritty, messy, and deeply human conflicts the Buddha actually had to resolve in these texts. Seriously, think about this. What do a band of thieves, a 50-coin fine, and doing a load of laundry have to do with the path to enlightenment? It sounds like the setup for a weird historical joke, right? But it's actually not. These bizarre inciting incidents force the Buddha to lay down highly specific, incredibly strict rules about something as ordinary as clothing. We usually think of enlightenment as this high-level philosophical state of meditation, but as we're going to see, achieving that state actually meant managing the practical headaches of living in a community. It required absolute clarity on personal boundaries.
So, let's look at the origin of these monastic robe precepts. Our very first case file involves a meditating nun named Upalavana, a band of thieves, and a notorious group of greedy monks known in the text as the Six-Group Monks. The setup is wild. These thieves were actually so impressed by Upalavana's serene meditation out in the forest that they decided to leave her an offering of meat, and they wrapped it in this highly valuable, fine cloth. But when she brought that offering back to the monastery, absolute chaos broke out.
Things escalated unbelievably fast. Almost the second the nun arrived, the Six-Group Monks swooped right in. They spotted that fine cloth, their greed completely took over, and they used their higher status to pressure and demand this valuable item right from her hands. She ended up handing it over, but later on, when she went to visit the Buddha, he immediately noticed her tattered robes and asked what on earth had happened.
The Buddha's response was incredibly swift and totally uncompromising. He summoned those monks immediately and reprimanded them. The crucial takeaway here is that monks absolutely cannot exploit unrelated nuns for material gain. So the Buddha established the rule of forfeiture. Basically, any ill-gotten robe taken from an unrelated nun without a valid trade or a prior invitation had to be surrendered immediately. It was a very firm line drawn in the sand to protect the more vulnerable members of the order. Which brings us right into this crucial theme of boundaries between monks and nuns, and it gets even more specific. There's another incident involving a monk named Udai, a nun he already knew, a soiled robe, and honestly, a wildly inappropriate crossing of personal boundaries. After what the texts describe as a highly awkward physical reaction while they were visiting each other, Udai actually gave the nun his soiled undergarment to wash. I mean, talk about crossing a line. As you can imagine, this caused a massive scandal in the community.
When word of this reached the Buddha, he stepped in with very specific prohibitions. He made it a strict rule that unrelated nuns are not allowed to wash, dye, beat, or iron a monk's old robe. And he wasn't just doing this to dictate who does what chores. He did it to maintain a rock-solid boundary. These physical separations were deeply intentional. They were designed to protect the purity and the extreme focus required for ascetic practice, and basically ensure that monks and nuns didn't fall into inappropriate domestic or intimate entanglements.
Moving on, we hit another major rule: do not covet from unrelated donors. And this introduces us to a fascinating, though definitely problematic character in the Vinaya, a monk named Upananda. Upananda had this terrible, recurring habit of exploiting the generosity of the lay people. In one specific instance, he spotted a layman wearing a really beautiful, high-quality set of clothes. So Upananda sits the guy down and actually uses religious preaching as a guilt trip, essentially badgering the layman until he practically extorted the clothes right off the man's back.
This story perfectly illustrates the profound, real-world damage that greedy behavior causes. The layman left feeling angry and humiliated, and he went straight to complain to the town guards. He literally compared the monks to highway robbers. Upananda's greed completely shattered the community's trust in the monastic order, and it turned their reverence into deep, deep resentment. The Buddha knew perfectly well that the very survival of the monastic community relied entirely on the goodwill of the laity, so he had to act fast.
He instituted a rule that a monk cannot just go up and beg for clothes from unrelated laypeople whenever they feel like it. But the Buddha was also incredibly pragmatic. He outlined strict, verifiable exceptions. You could only ask for clothing if you're facing a genuine emergency, like if your robes were robbed, lost, burned, or washed away in a flood. For example, this specific list was actually prompted by a poor monk who showed up at the monastery totally naked because he'd been ambushed by bandits on the road.
But, human nature is always tricky. Just contrast the totally legitimate, basic survival need of that robbed monk with the behavior of our old friends, the six-group monks. When the Buddha allowed the robbed monk to go ask for clothes, the six-group monks shamefully used his misfortune as a loophole. They went down into town and used his tragedy as an excuse to hoard excess luxurious clothing from wealthy donors under the guise of helping him, all while secretly keeping the very best stuff for themselves.
That kind of blatant exploitation directly contradicts the core of our next theme, which is compassion and specifically not burdening the laity. You see, the heart of these rules isn't just harsh discipline, it's deep empathy for everyday people. The Buddha desperately wanted to protect hardworking lay people from the endless financial demands of greedy monks. The laity had their own families to feed, their own daily struggles. The monastic order was supposed to be a spiritual refuge for them, not a financial parasite.
If you want to see exactly how audacious this got, look at Upananda again. In another incident, a layman had set aside a very specific budget to buy a basic robe as a donation for Upananda. Well, Upananda finds out, intercepts the layman before the purchase is even made, and demands a garment that was 2 or 3 times more expensive than the original budget. He actually tried to justify it by telling the guy, well, if you're going to give me something, you should make it the best. It's just unbelievable.
And his harassment actually got so bad that it started impacting local commerce. In one really astonishing case, a merchant was acting as an attendant holding robe funds. A mandatory town meeting was called, and the rule was anyone who showed up late would face a massive fine of 50 coins. Well, Upananda shows up right as the merchant is trying to close his shop and refuses to let the poor guy leave until a robe transaction is finished. Because of this, the merchant missed his meeting, was hit with that heavy 50-coin fine, and it caused a massive public uproar against the monks.
To put a complete stop to monks touching money or harassing busy people like that poor merchant, the Buddha instituted a highly exact, step-by-step protocol for receiving robe funds. It goes like this. A monk can verbally ask a designated attendant up to 3 times. If that doesn't work, they can stand silently up to 6 times. And if the attendant still doesn't provide the robe, the monk must simply walk away and notify the donor. That's it. No harassment, no demanding, and definitely no fines.
Ultimately, all of these dense legal rulings point toward the middle way and the true spirit of contentment. They really aren't just a list of punishments. They're a behavioral blueprint designed to cultivate a very specific, peaceful mindset. It's all about finding that delicate balance between extreme deprivation and unchecked indulgence. And, set against the beautiful, serene imagery of the Pure Land, we're reminded that all of this external, strict discipline was ultimately meant to foster an internal paradise.
What's really beautiful throughout the 10 recitations Vinaya is that it wasn't just the lay people complaining. Often it was the good monks reporting these infractions. The monks who continuously called out this bad behavior were described as having few desires, knowing contentment, and practicing asceticism. They were the true guardians of the faith. They actively pushed back against internal greed to protect the lay community and preserve the core spiritual integrity of the entire order.
So, as we reflect on these deeply human stories of greed, boundaries, and finding balance, we're essentially left holding up a mirror to our own society. The Buddha didn't just preach the concept of compassion, he literally engineered it into the daily, structural rules of his community to protect the vulnerable. It really makes you wonder, as we try to manage our own desires in the modern world, do our current codes of conduct protect our communities with that same level of practical, actionable compassion? It's definitely something profound to think about.